I've noticed that small business websites often have a very common problem where they have things showing up that are empty, that are not being used currently on this product or on a certain blog post, whatever it might be. A certain part of the page that would be better off hidden because it's probably being used on other pages, but not on this one. So as you can see here, the ingredients tab is coming from this product. This product actually has ingredients. This product is simply using the same product template, the same design of this page, and that's why it has this useless ingredients tab, right? So I want to hide this on this product. By the way, if you're new to this channel, I usually make videos about Shopify and about e-commerce, but this video is applicable for any platform that you may be using, WordPress, Webflow, Squarespace, whatever it may be, as long as you have a place where you can add some code, like some CSS code. So let's look at a non-Shopify example as well. Let's say that you have a blog and you have multiple authors for your blog, but let's say that this particular author did not provide his image. So we have this empty space here now. I mean, this doesn't look too bad, it could be worse, but still we have this empty space and we'd like it to go away and have the author's name lined up with the top. Right? So how do we do that? How do we detect that this div here, this element is empty? And based on that, hide it with CSS only. We don't want to do anything fancy. And with both of these examples, both with Shopify and on another platform, you might not want to edit the underlying code of the platform. In this example, I don't want to go into the theme code. I just want to add some CSS that hides this. Okay, it's easier to just add a small 2 lines of code, right, and hide this rather than editing the theme. Likewise with other platforms, you don't know what logic controls the generation of the author image, so it's easier to just write some CSS that would hide that. But the problem is, how do we target this element? How do we know that it's empty? So that's what this video is about. In modern CSS, we have some relatively new features called pseudo-classes, and some of these are empty, has, and not, and this can be really useful. Today I'm going to teach you how to use them, and I'll also show you a fallback with JavaScript if none of these methods are good for your situation. I'll be using Codepen to demonstrate things. This is just a code playground. It's codepen.io, and actually I'll put the link for my Codepen into the video description so that you can later visit it and see all of the examples that I created throughout this video. And I'm using this because it works exactly the same way as the code window that you will have on your platform of choice. So obviously for Shopify, for all my regular audience, it's the custom Liquid block, right? And you'd be writing this code inside of this Liquid code field. And I'm just using the HTML tab here. In Codepen, they allow you to split it up in CSS and JS, but actually I'll show you like this. I'll be putting my CSS inside of style tags, like so, and we'll be writing CSS in here. Likewise, when we get to the JavaScript, we'll be writing JavaScript in between script tags, and you can use all of these in your standard HTML window on your platform or in the Liquid code window on Shopify. And of course, guys, only I will be writing HTML, so this top part here. The only things that you need is the CSS or the JavaScript, so you will be copying this stuff and pasting that in here, right? Whereas the actual HTML that you're affecting is your page HTML, so this part is just for me to demonstrate things. So let's begin. My first example is quite a typical scenario, I think. It's a size guide. We have a div with the class of size guide. That's the container for the size guide, and I've put a gray border on it. And then inside of that, we simply have an image with the size guide. Okay, so let's quickly duplicate this and see what happens when that image doesn't load, because let's say that product doesn't have a size guide, right? What we're left with is an empty size guide div. Let's do this. So it's completely empty. As you can see, it still shows up on the page. It still has that border around it. So what can we do about this? Well, if the situation is this simple, then all we need to do is target that size guide class as we normally would with CSS. and we would normally display none, right? But this would hide both of them, but we only want to hide the empty one. So we can use the empty pseudo-class. And that works perfectly, right? So the one that has an image is still showing up, but the one that's empty is hidden. Perfect, right? You would think that it's perfect. It's only perfect if you have this perfect scenario where there is no white space, there is no other div or any other element inside of that size guide that you want to hide. As soon as I put even just a little space here, a single space, it's considered that it's not empty, okay? And so we can't hide it anymore. So I'll show you how to do a fallback for this later. But another situation that would often come up is that you have some kind of image wrapper, right? Let's call it div class image wrapper, like so, inside of the size guide div. And so because there's another div inside of this size guide div, it's also not empty. Luckily, we can handle this situation a different way. We can target an image wrapper that is empty, like so, right? The same way as we just did it here. But we don't just want to hide the image wrapper, do we? If we say display none on the image wrapper, then okay, this gets hidden, but the size guide is still showing, and so the border is still showing, it's still taking up the space. We actually want to target the size guide, which is the parent of this element, which is empty. So let's wrap this in brackets, and we're gonna say size guide, which has, right? And then these brackets, that's for the has, which has an image wrapper that is empty. Display none. Sorry, I've accidentally used 2 dashes here, but this should work. So as you can see, it's disappeared. It's gone. However, again, this white space problem. If this image wrapper has white space, then we can't use empty, right? So how else do we do it? Well, we can also target this image wrapper and this size guide based on the fact that there is no image inside of it, right? The actual HTML image tag. So let's do this. Using has, we can check a child, right? So we can check actually if a size guide has an image, okay? Let's say background red if the size guide does have an image. So this one should turn red, you see? But I want to flip that. I want to target the size guide div that does not have an image. So we can use not, like so. Size guide, not, and then wrap some brackets around this. Okay, some parentheses. So a size guide that is not a size guide that has an image, right, gets the background of red, or what we actually want to do is display none. Okay. Now let's go back to a simple example. Remember at the very beginning, I had this example where you have the size guide div, but it's got a space in it, so you can't use empty. And this one doesn't have like an image wrapper element in it either, so you can't check if the image wrapper is empty. But luckily this one still works. So I think this is one of the best methods, checking if it doesn't have an image tag inside it, right? Or some other element. But let's say that you're not using an image. Let's say in your situation, what you have is something like a paragraph, right? And if it was like this, if it was completely empty, you could use the empty pseudo-class to target that, right? And to target its parent, as I showed you. But if that's got a space, then that's like, this is the worst case scenario, right? Because this isn't gonna work, because you can't check for a size guide that does not have a paragraph, because it does have a paragraph element. The only problem is the paragraph element is empty, but not, it has a white space, okay? So that's not going to work either. So what do we do here? Well, here we have to fall back to using JavaScript. Using JavaScript, it's quite easy to detect an empty element like this, or an element that contains only white space. And then using JavaScript, we can dynamically add a class to these elements, a class that makes sense to us, for example, is empty. And then we can target that class as we normally would in CSS, like so, display none, and that would hide this, of course. Or you can combine that with what I taught you earlier. Using has, we can hide the entire size guide, which has inside of it an element with the class of isEmpty. If you're completely new to JavaScript, that's okay, don't worry. We're not going to write every line of this. You can simply copy and paste from my blog post, which you'll find in the video description. Paste it into your script tags here, and I'll walk you through it so you understand what's going on. But the only part that you will actually need to change is this line here, okay? And let me show you why. What this code does is it loops over every single element, this one, this one, this one, this one, and it checks if it's empty. And then of course, as I mentioned, it adds that class isEmpty. Now, doing this, checking every single element for an entire web page, for an entire website, right, is a rather expensive operation for your browser. I mean, we're still talking milliseconds, but we just don't do these things because it's bad for performance, right? So we don't want to check every single element on the whole website. We want to limit it only to the smallest possible scope. So in my case, I'm going to limit it to this product info section. Do you know what I mean? And I'll show you how that looks on a real website and how you should do this. Basically, you're going to right click and inspect on the element that you actually want to hide. And then you need to look for the closest possible parent of that element. In my case, I'm looking kind of for the closest possible parent of both accordions, right? Because I want to check each of them if they're empty. If they are empty, we're going to hide them. So I'm hovering over these elements in the sidebar here, and I'm just looking that, okay, these are right next to each other. So actually the closest possible parent is this element, which is actually called product info. It's a web component. It doesn't matter. Point is, you look at the class here, and we're going to use one of these classes. So product info container. Each class is separated by a space. Okay, if you're not familiar with classes, this is a class that we can use to target this entire container and check every element inside of it for if it's empty. And this is a lot better. At least it's just this instead of the entire web page. At least it's just this small part of the page. So I would copy that class, product info container, and just with the dot means class, paste it in here. Okay. At this point, the JavaScript is working and my size guide is hidden. I've changed it back to the class that I'm actually using. And let me show you what this actually looks like if I inspect the code. Obviously, in the source code, I haven't added the isEmpty class, but when we inspect the actual generated website, we have the class isEmpty on this paragraph, okay? And JavaScript is doing that. And that means that I can now target that isEmpty class with my CSS. And I'm using has to target the parent, right? So a size guide that has inside of it an isEmpty display none. And that's all there is to it. Now, you can continue watching a little bit if you want to know more about this code, because I've written a fallback that also handles images. Let me demonstrate this to you as well. In the case that your website loads something like this, where it does load an image, but the source is empty, yeah, then my JavaScript is going to handle this situation as well, because it's going to check. I have this line here that says if the element is an image, then it's going to check the actual source attribute of that image. And if there's nothing in the source, it's also going to get the isEmpty class, okay? So it handles that sort of scenario as well. I have not checked this code though for other types of media, right? I have not checked with like videos or anything like that. So you might need to tweak the code if you have something a bit more complex. There's also a few lines in here that check for elements that don't have a closing bracket. And it does not add isEmpty to those elements because those elements are supposed to be empty. The elements I'm talking about are breaker, which is like a new line, and HR, which is horizontal rule. And these elements, as you can see, they're not hidden, even though they're detected as empty, but I've had this if statement that don't do anything. These are supposed to be empty, right? These are self-closing elements. And that's all there is to it, guys. Again, there's more details in the blog post, so if anything wasn't clear, then check out the blog post as well. I hope you find this helpful. I'll probably link the Codepen as well so you can play around with it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and if you want me to make any other videos on similar topics, let me know in the comments as well. Please leave a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye.